Hello everyone, hope you are all well. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to a new video. In this video, we're going to show you how to fix a no video output issue on a PlayStation 4 Slim. So also known as a white light of death issue. This is where you connect your PlayStation 4 Slim up, turn it on, and you get no display whatsoever on the screen. So let's get into it.
For your Xbox and PlayStation repairs, visit consoletherapy.com.
So first things first, what we need to do is obviously take the PlayStation 4 Slim apart. Now obviously bear in mind, this will invalidate any warranties. So as soon as you open a PlayStation or even an Xbox or any device really, that will invalidate your warranty. Now, as you can see on the rear, there's actually a warranty label there which we need to remove. So let's get that screw out that's behind that. We need to remove the hard drive, then we need to take the casing off. So first off, with the warranty label, you get yourself a pair of tweezers. Just pick to one side of it, and then you'll be able to peel this warranty label off, like so. Get yourself a Torx screwdriver, and there's just one screw there that needs to come out. Just pop that screw out, put that to one side. We need to remove the hard drive, which is just behind this casing here. So literally that just pops to the side like so, and off that comes. And then we need a crosshead or a Phillips screwdriver to remove this screw here, which holds the hard drive in place. So we take that one out as well. And then we can literally, using this little connector there, just pull out the hard drive like so, and out the hard drive comes. So put that to one side, nice and safe. And then we need to remove the casing. So with the front of the PlayStation 4 Slim facing away from you, if you grab one corner like so, just put your fingers in just in here like this, and then pull up like so, the top piece of the casing comes off, and do the same on the opposite side, and that pops off. Then you can pull the top casing away, and then flip it over. Now with the rear of the PS4 facing away from you, pretty much the same thing. Get your fingers just behind the casing like so, lift it up, and off it will pop, both corners like so. And then this time you're pulling it towards you, right? So there's a lip at the front. So you're lifting it gently this way and then pulling it towards you. So we're lifting up, giving it a wiggle and pulling it this way, and off the bottom case comes. Okay, so then we are on into the insides of the PlayStation. Here we have the power supply. There's some fingerprints on this, so it looks like someone's already been in it. We need to undo all of these screws, right? So as you know, we're taking everything apart, right? We're taking the motherboard out. We need to remove all of these screws here. There's a couple of screws here that we need to remove, which actually hold the chassis together as well. So let's do that now. Now there's a mixture of crosshead screws and Torx screws. These ones here are all crosshead. So we can just pop those off like so. Now some models of the PlayStation Slim only have 2 screws at the back. So if yours has only got 2 screws, just remove those 2 screws. And obviously you won't have these ones here to remove, but you will still have these Torx ones just here that you need to remove as well. So get your Torx bit, undo that all the way. Now these are quite long screws. So we take that off like so, and then just grab this whole silver RF shield. Just make sure your screws are undone all the way, and that will pop off, and you can bring your screws out with you as well. Right, so the screws are still there. Take that off. Again, on this model PS4, there is the Wi-Fi antenna at the back. The newer models of these don't actually have them here. So if you do have your antenna there, just undo that screw and then just slide this metal antenna away towards the back just for now, there's a cable there, just be careful, don't pull it too hard. And then just feed the cable through, like so, but don't pull it too hard, because you do risk breaking the solder joint. Right, for now, we're going to leave that in place, okay? We're going to focus on this screw here, which is a Torx, again, screw. So that one needs to come out. So now what we need to do at this point is flip the PlayStation over, and you will see quite a few screws that you need to remove, right? So there's a mixture of black and silver screws. Now the black screws that you can see, they're machine screws, so basically they go into metal. The majority of the silver screws you see are self-tapping screws, which means they go into plastic, okay? Now what I like to do, if you're doing this for the first time, this is a good tip, put it that way, right? So I've done this many times, so I can remember where the screws go. If you just get yourself a whiteboard marker, right, so not a permanent marker, but a whiteboard marker, and just put a little dot, right, next to where the black screws go, right, because later on, when you're putting this back together again, all the screw holes look exactly the same. And if you've got this little mark, right, next to all the black screws, when you're putting it back together, it just visually makes it really easy just to find where the black screws go. Okay, so obviously this can rub off later. This is just a whiteboard marker, not a permanent marker. Just mark those as well. Right, so basically now we need to take all of these screws that you can see out. On the back here, so where the hard drive caddy is, there's a couple of little screws here that you need to take off as well, because this metal chassis comes off. So 1, 2, like so. Now, with all of those screws taken out, we can now remove the power supply. Now, the reason we did it around that way is because there's a couple of screws which actually hold the power supply in from this side as well. So let's remove the power supply. Just get your fingers underneath like this. Just give it a bit of a wiggle both sides and it will start to pop off. Be careful of the Wi-Fi antenna. Make sure it feeds through the gap. Lift up, don't yank up the power supply, just lift it up gently, because there's a cable here which connects it to the motherboard. And then if you just grab that, it's really hard to show it on camera, but just grab that with your fingers there and then pull it off away from the power supply. Like so, off that pops, right? So that connector is just there, connecting to that cable, just be careful of that. Pop your power supply to one side for a moment. There's a couple of antenna connectors over here which you need to take off as well. So you give yourself a pair of tweezers and then just pop those off. Like so. Then, quick tip, just feed this cable, this power cable, along a little bit to make your life a little bit easier. All right, just going to get some slack there. It's when you remove the motherboard in a minute. All right, so we just fed that cable. It's held on by clips here, right? So what you can essentially do is if you feed the cable through, there's loads of slack there. So when you flip it back over now, when you lift out the motherboard, it'll be easy to lift out, and you'll see why in a minute. Disconnect all of these cables and the other Wi-Fi connector up here. So again, pair of tweezers, just pop that off. Feed that through. Try not to rip the labels because you can use them again. So it's nice and loose. Disconnect the Blu-ray cables. Now these ones just pop off. This one here, the wider one, there's a little tab on the on the connector, a little black tab you need to lift up and then pull the cable out, then just close that tab. And these two down the bottom, they just pull out like so. Power connector for the fan down here. Give that a bit of a wiggle and pull it off like so. And then, as long as you've got all of the screws out, this metal frame should lift off like so. Okay, now as you lift it off, just be careful not to lose any of these heat pads or thermal pads, because we do need to make sure they're replaced. And then we are down to the motherboard. So we've got the clamp for the heatsink, so that needs to come off. So it's just 2 screws on that. 1, 2. Put that to one side, and then there's a little bracket underneath that just lifts off as well. And then you should be able to lift off the motherboard. Now, this is where the power cable is, the one that you've loosened off on the other side, right? So hence why I said loosen it off, because watch, when you lift it up, the cable now lifts up, and it's a lot easier then just to give this a bit of a wiggle and then just disconnect it. And then out comes your motherboard. Right, so now we're to the motherboard. We can move this chassis out of the way and take a look to see actually what's going on while there's no video output on this motherboard. Now, straight away jumping out at me, what I can see is this HDMI port does actually look damaged. So if I zoom in, what you'll be able to see, hopefully, is the port itself is actually pushed back, right? So we're going to need to replace the HDMI port. Looking at it from this angle, it kind of looks like the HDMI port's all right, but it's not. The actual metal outer part of the HDMI port is fine, it's in the correct place, but the actual pins that the cable connects to have been pushed back, and you can see that by looking at this angle, right? Because this black piece here should be forward a lot more. Okay, so we need to replace the HDMI port. So let's do that now. So what's the easiest way to replace the HDMI ports? Now, on YouTube, there are plenty of videos to show you actually how to replace the HDMI port. The method I'm about to show you, I find, is the easiest and the cleanest method. So first things first, what we need to do is just try and get access to the actual pins. Now, as you can see, I've just pushed that black plastic piece of the HDMI port forward where it should actually be. So now we can actually get to the pins, right? Because what we need to do is add some leaded solder to those pins and to the legs of the HDMI port, so it's easier to remove. So let's do that now. So first things first, we're going to add some flux to the legs of the HDMI ports, or the pads. We're going to add some flux to the actual legs that hold the port on as well. And then we are going to come in with our soldering iron and some leaded solder. And we're actually going to put a load of solder, leaded solder, along all of these pins that are there already. Okay. So I'm literally putting a load of solder there, like so. Obviously, the port is coming off, so I don't care about damaging the port. I'm just being careful of the actual pads on the motherboard. Similar to these side legs here, adding a load of solder, like so. Then I'm going to flip the board over. I'm just going to remove this little RF gasket, and then, as before, to the legs on this side, add some flux, come back in with our soldering iron and add loads of solder to the legs on the underside of the motherboard. Essentially what that's doing is just, it'll make, when we come in with the hot air in a minute, it will make the solder melt a lot easier and quicker for us. Okay, so there, that's the port, you know, with the leaded solder put on there. Now what we're going to do is come in with our heat gun and warm up the entire area, and we're just going to gently pop off the broken HDMI ports. Now I've set my air gun to 480 degrees with an airflow of 80%. So let's come in with that now. We're going to grab a pair of tweezers as well, so we're ready. Now what I'm doing, I'm literally heating the whole area. Okay, I'm heating the ports itself as well. I'm going to flip the motherboard over. I'm going to heat this side as well. And I'm also heating in between the legs. That's obviously where the pads are for the HDMI ports. Flipping the motherboard back over, and you can see already it's just fallen off, right? That is how easy it is to remove an HDMI port, right? It shouldn't be any more difficult than that, right? Just literally just apply your heat to the port itself, on top of the ports, right? Because it's metal, the heat runs down, okay, and it will run through these legs here to the actual where they're held onto the motherboard, and then make sure you apply some heat to where the pads are as well, and then that will easily just fall off, right? Just as you saw, you just flip it over, heat it up both sides, and eventually it pretty much just falls off by itself. Sometimes you have to get a pair of tweezers and help it off really gently, but most of the time it will just fall off. Right, so we now need to remove the solder that's on the motherboard currently. So what I'm going to do, now there's two ways of doing this. I prefer to use a solder sucker, right? They're really cheap. Come in and then just take off this solder from the actual legs that hold the HDMI port on, and then I use some solder wick to remove the solder from the pads. So I'm going to come in with my heat gun. I am going to heat up where the solder is for the legs, right? Again, just heating up this area. And get ready with my solder sucker. And then just where the legs are, or where the legs used to be, we're coming in and we're just using the solder sucker to remove that solder. And then we're going to come in with our wick. We're going to add a little bit of flux to where the pads are. Grab our soldering iron. Spin the board round so it's a bit easier to get to. And we're going to wick off the excess solder that's on these pads. Okay, now I know that's really hard to see on camera. And what you notice is as well, when you wick off solder from pads like this, right, just make sure you go in the same direction as the pad, right? It's tempting to go across, but because you're heating the pad, you do risk of actually damaging the pad doing that. So just go in the same direction, like so. When you're adding solder, it doesn't matter too much, right? But because the wick's quite abrasive and you're adding heat to it, if you go that way, you can at risk damaging the pads. When you're adding solder, however, it's quite light, so it doesn't matter too much if you go left to right. So just a quick tip. Now we're going to clean the whole area up with some IPA or isopropyl alcohol. Just make sure it's all nice and clean. like so. Okay, and now what we'll do is we'll jump underneath the microscope so I can show you a close-up of how to get the pads ready for the new HDMI port. Right, so here we are under the microscope, and you can see obviously where we just removed the HDMI ports. You can see the pads there. Now we'll finish cleaning everything up a little bit later because we do need to add some more flux and solder. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come in with obviously some flux and then some solder and add some solder to these pads here. Okay, and then I'm going to show you a really easy way of adding the HDMI port. So let's come in first of all with our flux. We're just going to run a bead of flux along there. We are going to come in with our solder. What we need to do is tin up these pads, just move it so I can get to it a bit easier, with our nice fresh leaded solder. We can sort out any bridges in a minute. As I say, now I'm adding solder. It doesn't matter too much if we go left to right. It's only when using that solder wick you just need to be a little bit careful. So we're adding loads of solder to the pads, which is exactly what we want. Just going to be careful to make sure we remove any bridges. Like so. Right, we can leave that flux there for the minute. So what we're going to do quickly first of all is just make sure that all of the pins align to the pads on this port, which is the new ports, which they do. Great. Now with this method, what we're going to do, we're going to come in, heat this whole area up first of all. Okay, we're going to come in with the HDMI port and drop it into place and continue heating it. Right, now what will happen is obviously the legs on the ports will get nice and warm as well, and then they will solder correctly in position to the pads on the motherboard. So let's do that now. Again, heat is at 480. Airflow is around 75% now. So I'm literally going to come in, heat the pads up. And you'll notice they'll start to obviously have a bit more of a shine and go silver, which means the solder's ready to accept the new port. I'm coming in with the port, I'm dropping it into place and I'm holding it there, and then I'm coming back in with the heat again. Okay. Then we let go of the port, and then as you can see, the pins are now soldered into place, right? But it's very weak at the minute. So what we need to do is flip it over straight away and then solder the legs of the HDMI port on this side. Just get that done straight away without putting any more pressure on the port itself. So we'll add some flux. come in with our solder. And I like to go opposites. I leave the soldering iron on there for a little bit longer just to let some of the solder run through to the top side of the motherboard. We can come back and clean the area up in a minute. So now I flip it back around, and then now the port is a little bit more secure. We can give everything a good clean up. Right, now everything is cleaned up. Let's take a proper look and see how those pins or legs soldered. So let's see if we can zoom in a little bit more. Right, now still a little bit of flux there, which I'll clean up later. But if you see that now, each leg of the HDMI port is well and truly soldered to each pad, and there's no bridges. Right, so if we come along, we'll do a tweezer check. Right, little push nudge check on each one. Yep, all good. And what you can see is that's a much cleaner way of actually replacing the HDMI ports. Right, so there's no bridges, you haven't got to worry about coming in and touching each pin individually. I mean, you can do. I mean, I just find it a lot easier tinning up the pads, then coming in with the HDMI port with the heat gun and keep the heat gun there. Now, what you can do as well is, as you can see, there's not much solder that's flowed through by the legs here. So you can add just a little bit more solder there if you want to. So I will do that off camera, and I will also finish cleaning up the underside as well off camera, because that needs a bit of a clean. And then we will get it reassembled back into the PlayStation. So now we are back ready to reinstall the motherboard. So first of all, we need to clean up the old thermal paste. So a bit of isopropyl, get an old cloth, give it a wipe over and remove all the old thermal paste. Same on the motherboard. I like to put a bit of isopropyl on the APU, and then just run a cotton bud all over it, clearing up the removing the old thermal paste. And then finish it off with a cloth. That way you can be sure all of the old thermal paste is removed. Now, nice new thermal paste. Pop that onto the APU, like so. And then what we need to do is reinstall the motherboard. So, you know, just make sure that these thermal pads are in place. There should be one there, and there should be 3 along here. They're actually stuck to the ICs on the motherboard. So what I like to do is just pop them on the actual chassis end so they don't fall off as I'm putting the motherboard back in. Like that. Right, so you should have 3 thermal pads there and then a couple up there. So we've got a motherboard with nice fresh thermal paste. Now what we can do is pop the motherboard back in. Easiest way to do this is, first of all, get the power cable that we removed off earlier. Pop that into place now onto the motherboard, and then feed the power cable through this little gap here, right? So put it through, like so. Take up the slack, keep it loose though, and now feed in the ports to the back of the console like so, making sure that all our aerial and our ribbon cables are out of the way. We can just drop down the motherboard like so, get the power cable for the fan, pop that into place like so, and then drop down the motherboard. Give it a little bit of a squeeze where the thermal paste is. Make sure there's no snagging on any of the cables, so it's not. Connect to our fan power, good. Then we get our clamp for the heatsink, and we pop that back on. Like so, and then just tighten it evenly. Don't do one side all the way. Okay, so it's nice and evenly tighted. Don't over tighten those, just do them, you know, tight enough so it stops turning, but don't then try and wrench it even more. Just be careful of that. Okay, then we need the top metal frame piece. Again, if you see any dust, give it just a bit of a quick clean over. You can use a bit of isopropyl on there. Just try and remove any stubborn marks. Making sure, again, that these thermal pads are all in place. Yeah, you might find some stick to these RAM chips on the motherboard. If they do, just make sure they've all got one. And these two capacitors here, make sure that they have got a thermal pad aligned to them as well. So just drop the metal top case in place, again making sure you are not snagging the ribbon cables. Drop it into place like so. Okay, and then what we can do is start adding all of our screws. Now, the tip I gave you earlier, you remember, we put a little black mark next to all of the screws that had the black screw in. All right, now your life's a lot easier because when you start attaching the screws, you know exactly where all the black screws go. So let's do that now. Right, so you should have all of your screws, these top screws in, with the exception of one, this one screw over here, because that's the screw that screws through to the power supply, so we need to install the power supply before that goes in. And then also don't forget these two screws at the top here. They were the smaller screws. And then what we can do is connect up all of the cables. I do a quick scan and check as well to make sure I haven't missed a screw. I'm sure if I have someone in the comments will be screaming out at me. Thank you very much. So these cables, these first two, just slide back in. This one, black flap, lifted it up, pop the cable under the black flap, push it in that way, and then just push the black flap back down again. And this one as well just pushes in like so. Don't forget your aerial cable. Just work it back through from where you removed it. Try to pop it underneath the label to keep it nice and tidy as well. And then pop on the connector to the motherboard. Like so, it just pops on. Come with a cloth and just remove the black marks that you added earlier, just because it's nice, keeps it nice and tidy then. Another quick scan for any screws that I've missed. Don't think I've missed any. It's just that one there, which is fine because, oh no, I have missed one, spotted it just here. There you go, I always miss one. This one here next to that is fine though, because as I say, the power supply needs to go in, which is what we'll do now. So we flip it over. Let's give this a good dust off here. Obviously you've got our power lead, which we fed through earlier. So just leave that to the side for a minute. Aerial cable, again, let's just feed that through and then pop it back onto the connector. Here, where these connect, let's just zoom you in, it's really easy to tell. The black cable goes to the connector with B on it. The grey cable, which runs to the back, goes to the connector with the letter G next to it. It can be a bit fiddly, so you can grab yourself a pair of tweezers, hover the connector over, and then just snap it in position. Same with the grey one, hover it over and just try to snap it into position. Like so. Now with the power cable, what we do, we'll just feed it back through the little clips that are here to keep it nice and tidy and out of the way, like so. Grab our power supply, and it's always worth giving this a bit of a dust as well with your air duster. So in we come with the power supply. Got the little connector there, which connects to the power cable here. So I'll line it up. And then it's quite hard to show you on camera, and then just snap it in, push it into position. Spin your power supply around, making sure it's aligned and ready to go. Don't push it down yet though, because what you need to do is get this cable fed through this little cable run here, like so. Give it a bit of a wiggle, and then finally push it down, like so. And then we can add all of our screws again. And then when you're connecting the aerial at the back, there's a little clip which needs to go over the power supply, and then add your screw into that there. Like so. And then we need to add in the RF shield that's got the screws in it still. Drop it down. They are the Torx type screws. One and two, and then we have one screw left, which is the screw which can now be placed back in here now the power supply is in position, like so. Now all that's left to do is to get the casings back on. So obviously really important, clean the casing as well, making sure the majority of the dust is removed, because you don't want that dust going back in your fan. Okay, now I start with the bottom piece of the casing, just a bit with the lip. Take the PS4 this way around, you're going to go inwards like so. So we're just going to drop it into the lip of the case. We're going to give it a wiggle and it will pop, and then we can drop it down. We can then flip it around and then give it a squeeze, and back on it pops. Very similar with the top case. Again, make sure it's nice and clean, free of dust. Now this top one, hook the back over first of all, like so. Make sure it's nice and flush, and literally just push down on either corner the front, like so. Then it's back on. Finally, pop back in your hard drive. Goes in that way round, like so, and add this screw to hold the hard drive in position. Pop back on the little plastic bezel which covers the hard drive. Snap it in and then push it that way, and it will go. And then our final screw is for the casing. Our final black screw. Just peel back the warranty label again, and then pop your screw in. Like so, and then just put the warranty label over it again. All done. So now my final tip, now the HDMI port is replaced, what we need to do, all right, because we've used quite a lot of flux, we're going to get some IPA, isopropyl alcohol, and we're going to spray it directly into the port. And what this does, any excess flux that has risen up through the port when we've been soldering it, cleans it out. So you've got a toothbrush, isopropyl alcohol down the port. Obviously it's still powered off, it's not going to do any damage at all. Get your toothbrush in there, give it a good clean, and then that will remove any excess flux that has risen up through the port while we've been repairing it or replacing it, and then it will get rid of any flux that's there. Done. So as I say, just a quick video there to help you show you an easy way on how to replace an HDMI port on a PS4 Slim. I think it's a lot easier doing it that way. There's less risk of the pins being bridged on the HDMI port, and it just seems a lot cleaner and quicker way to do it. Obviously, there's nothing wrong if you do it the other way. Just make sure that you clear any bridges off the pins of the HDMI port. And with either method you use, always make sure you go in with the tweezers and do the little nudge test just to make sure you've got no loose pins after you've installed the new port. So thanks very much for watching the video. Really appreciate your view. Please consider giving us a thumbs up. It really does help us out. And also please consider subscribing to the channel. It doesn't cost you a penny, but it really does help us out. We are posting new videos weekly now on how to fix PlayStation and Xbox, as well as the new Xbox series models and the PlayStation 5s. So please click the bell icon and you'll be notified when we post those new videos every Friday. As I say, thanks very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Speak to you all soon. Bye bye for now.